Hello, everyone. Well, I thought I wouldn't need my glasses because I made it in really big print, but I think I might have been mistaken. All right. It looks like there's a lot, but it's just really big. Welcome to the second annual Chautauqua Theatre, Nevada's Pioneering Spirit. My name is Jennifer Jones, and I'm the Education Curator at the Churchill County Museum. And before we get started, I thought I might share a bit of history for those of you who are new to a Chautauqua performance. In 1874, a summer camp was established in Chautauqua, New York, for training in Christian education. In time, these retreats became synonymous with forward-thinking discussions of science, religion, politics, and literature. This quickly spread into a movement, and Chautauqua camps and literary societies spread throughout the nation. Chautauqua companies were formed and added speeches, debates, children's activities, musical and theatrical performances. Unfortunately, with the advent of radio and movies and automobiles, the Chautauqua popularity decreased. Although to this day, Chautauqua, New York continues to be a well-known center related to music, the arts, and humanities. So that brings us to today. The Churchill County Museum hosts two Chautauqua programs, the Young Chautauqua program for ages 12 through 18, and the Adult Chautauqua Theater program. The adult Chautauqua performers you will see today have been meeting every Wednesday since July 10th. They have chosen, researched, and have become the characters you will see this afternoon. This year we have 7 performers. Pam Duarte as Alice Ramsey, Deb Stewart as Dr. Virginia Smith, Tom Jones as I.H. Kent, Glen Perazzo as Sam Short, Jessica Rowe as Ada Keddie, Jennie Mater as Mary Daisy Allen, and Mel Glover as Willie Capucci. All of these characters are pioneers in one way or another. So what is a pioneer? A pioneer is not only a person who is among the first to explore or settle a new country, but also someone who sees potential, an innovator who is willing to try new things. A pioneer pushes boundaries to enhance a cause or idea or break a record. Before I leave the stage, just a reminder to please silence your phones. There's no flash photography, and after we hear from I.H. Kent, we'll take a short 10-minute intermission. The snack bar is open. After we hear from Willie Capucci, our last speaker, we will continue with the Chautauqua tradition of asking our performers questions, first as their character, and second as themselves. So if you could please hold all your questions until the end, where all the performers are back up on stage. This has been such a fun program, and you are in for a treat. So enjoy the show.
Good afternoon. How many of you here just love driving your automobile or enjoy a great adventure? Well, I'm here today to share a story of an epic journey I took 10 years ago that I completed on August 7th, 1909, and it brought me through your lovely town of Fallon. And I hope that by the time I'm done with my story, you'll be inspired to get out there on the road and discover your own adventure. My name is Alice Ramsey, and I am known as a vehicular pioneer because I was the first woman to drive across the transcontinental United States in 1909. I'm wearing my driving gear today because since that first journey, I have continued to drive across this nation many times and plan to for many more years to come. As you can see, I am very passionate about driving. Now, my interest in the automobile first came about when I was in high school, and I decided to take shop classes instead of the traditional feminine arts because I was really intrigued by the internal combustion engine. And I probably need to give credit to my father, John Buller, as well, from whom I most likely inherited my mechanical abilities. Now, after high school, I went on to attend Vassar College for 2 years, and then I married Congressman John Rathbone Ramsey in 1906 in New Jersey. I was 20, and he was 43 and a widower. Now, about 2 years later in 1908, I was driving my horse and buggy when all of a sudden, an automobile came racing past us at 30 miles an hour and spooked my horse. Well, my thoughtful husband, right then and there, decided I would probably be safer if I had my own automobile, and that it might also give me some sense of independence. Little did he know. Well, he bought me a brand new 1908 red Maxwell Roadster for $825. And then he hired a Maxwell agent to actually teach me how to drive it. And that summer, over 3 months, I put 6,000 miles on my brand new car, just driving around New Jersey. And then in September of that year, I decided I really wanted to participate in the American Automobile Association's Mach 2-point endurance race. That was a 200-mile race from New York to the point of Long Island. And I was just one of 2 women who were participating in this race. I was very fortunate to win the bronze trophy for having a perfect race. Well, I was approached soon after that by one of the other drivers. Carl Kelsey was his name. And he proposed that I drive across the transcontinental United States, sponsored by the Maxwell Briscoe Company, which happened to be the 3rd largest American automobile maker at the time. Now, you have to understand that even just 10 years ago, it was definitely considered a man's job to drive. In fact, it was believed that speeds of even 15 to 20 miles an hour would cause great physical ailments to a woman, including what they called automobile face, which was the belief that the wind would blow a woman's mouth into a permanent gate. Now, clearly that didn't happen to me. Around that time, 10 years ago, there was about 155,000 automobiles on America's roads, but only 5% of them were being driven by women. So the Maxwell Briscoe Company saw this as a great marketing opportunity to prove that driving was truly a safe activity for the fit female population. Now, surprisingly, my husband was very encouraging of my desire to meet this challenge, in spite of the fact that we had a 2-year-old son at home. Now, what you need to understand about my dear John is that he is a non-mechanical, non-traveling man who only ventures far from home if fishing or hunting are involved. And in fact, every time we buy a new automobile, he just takes one ride in it and then asks, "How do you stop this thing?" Well, this cross-country journey had already been accomplished once in 1903 by a man, Dr. Horatio Nelson Jackson. And so people thought I was crazy to even consider it. But I thought, why not? If he can do it, I can do it. I'm 22 years old and I'm raring to go. And so my 2 dear sister-in-laws, Margaret and Nettie, who were in their 40s at the time, and my dear friend Hermione, who was 19, decided to join me on the journey. Now, mind you, none of them could drive, but they did make great traveling companions. So the Maxwell Bristol Company provided us with a 1909 green Maxwell DA valued at $1,500, and it could travel up to 40 miles an hour. It had 2 bench seats, and it had a canvas top that was removable. They put in a 20-gallon fuel tank instead of the typical 14-gallon, and it was placed under that first bench seat. Now, unfortunately, the fuel could only be measured approximately using a measuring stick. And then they added a rack on the right side of the car, which happened to be the driver's side, so that we could carry 2 extra tires with us. Now, the real catcher was that we women were each allowed 1 suitcase each. So if you can imagine 4 women driving across the country with just 1 suitcase each. And then, of course, our dusters and our veiled hats also gave us extra protection from the dirt and the wind, because the Maxwell did not have a windshield. So the first day of our exciting journey finally arrived on June 9th, 1909, 10 a.m. at Hell's Gate Bridge in Manhattan, New York. And our final destination was the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California. So truly coast to coast. Now, it was raining very hard that day, and I remember feeling anxious that I was worried that the rain might make it difficult for me to see. So I kissed my husband farewell, cranked up the car, and we 4 women were off on the adventure of a lifetime. Now, that first day saw us driving on slippery, unpaved roads. But we still managed to complete 76 miles that first day. Now, of the 3,800 miles we were going to travel, only 152 miles were actually on a paved surface. And we could average anywhere between 4 and 198 miles in a day, depending on what we encountered along the way. We traveled through 12 states, 128 communities, or counties, and over 700 communities. You know, today I am very grateful that they completed the Lincoln Highway a few years ago, because it certainly made the journey out here this time much more enjoyable. Now, as we traveled across the vastly different lands of our great country, we encountered lots of different experiences. In fact, so many, it would probably take a book to share all the details. And you know, that's an idea. I think I actually might write a book about it one day. First of all, we were very dependent on the AAA Blue Book that gave us directions from town to town, at least on the East Coast. And it worked really well until we came to the direction that told us to turn left at the yellow house and barn. Well, we didn't see a yellow house and barn. So we finally stopped and asked a woman who was in her front yard, and she explained that the road we needed was a mile back at the greenhouse and barn. Well, you see, the man who lived there was not very fond of automobiles, and so he chose to change the color of his house and barn to mess with our minds. Now, as I mentioned already, the roads were not very desirable. I remember changing at least 7 flat tires. We had several broken axles. There was one point where we needed to cross the Platte River, and the only way across was a railroad bridge, and so we had to bump along on the railroad tracks to get to the other side. We ran out of gas. Our wheels would get stuck in the sand and the mud, and several times we had to have horses pull us out. Oh, and then there was the time when we were out in the middle of nowhere, and our radiator ran out of water. Well, we had to get real creative. And we had cut glass toothbrush holders that were similar in size to this. So we took those out, and we went down to the ditches, and gathered water and brought it up to fill our radiator. It took us 3 stops to do that before we finally got to the next town. We encountered all kinds of weather. Lots of rain, hailstorms, horrendous winds. And oh, one interesting thing was when we were in Nebraska, we got stopped by the police for questioning. They were looking for a murder suspect. I guess he looked suspicious. As we crossed over finally into Nevada, we had a difficult time finding Ely. We came to a fork in the road, and we took the left side, and unfortunately it did not get us to our intended destination. There was no one around to ask, so we looked and consulted the few maps we had and finally figured out where we were. We traveled on towards Eureka, and as we're driving along, we suddenly hear a thunderous noise off in the distance. Well, thinking that perhaps a thunderstorm was headed our way, we looked up towards the hills, and we were terrified to see at least a dozen Indians on horseback with bows and arrows drawn, heading straight in our direction. Well, I have to say, we were relieved when they just passed us by, and it became very evident that they were simply on a hunt for a jackrabbit. And then as we approached Fallon, our spirits were buoyed. The beautiful green ranches were such a welcome sight. In fact, we deemed Fallon, which had been incorporated that year, as the prettiest spot in Nevada. We were greeted by people at the Hotel Churchill where we had lunch, and then we made the wise decision to purchase 2 more tires at the local garage before we moved on. As we traveled on through Hazen and Fernley and Wadsworth, I reflected on the fact that automobiling for pleasure, for the leisure class, such as myself, was one thing, but quite another for the people who lived in the towns and on the farms across rural America who were truly needing that highway to be completed. And then as we approached Sparks, we were so excited to see it brilliantly lit up by electricity. We felt like we had finally arrived back in civilization. On to Carson City, we had lunch at a Japanese restaurant, and while we were there, we learned there had been another earthquake in San Francisco. Fortunately, not as devastating as the one 3 years prior in 1906. Well, we pushed on up over the Sierra Nevadas by way of South Lake Tahoe, and it was a very steep climb towards Sacramento on an old wagon road, deep with sand. In fact, it took us 8 hours to go just 70 miles. We had to keep stopping to let the car cool off. But along the way, we were mesmerized by the clear blue skies, the crystal waters, and the majestic trees. We had never seen anything like it before. Well, by twilight of August 6th, we arrived in Hayward, California, just 30 miles from our destination. And it was while we were there that we were accosted by a horrendous wind that threatened to take our very apparel. But a good tight grip kept us from exposing our birthday suits. Now that would have made an interesting headline. Then when we arrived in Oakland, the Maxwell was placed on a ferry to carry it across the water to San Francisco. And it was during that time that my mind was filled with thoughts of home. Oh, how I missed my husband and my little son, John. I was so ready to get back. Well, we finally reached our destination on August 7th. After 59 days, 3,800 miles. And we were greeted by hundreds of well-wishers at the St. James Hotel and in the streets of San Francisco. You know, I think one of the highlights of my entire trip was meeting all the people across our great nation who came out to greet us as we traveled through their communities. Well, we stayed in San Francisco for 3 days, and then we got home to New Jersey by way of train this time. I'm so excited to see family and friends. You know, I think that the really brave ones, though, were my husband, who trusted in my ability after just 1 year's experience behind the wheel, and my dear companions, who truly put themselves in my hands as we crossed those little known stretch of miles. Now, you may not be aware of it, but at about the same time we were making that journey by automobile, Orville Wright was actually testing the first military airplane successfully that was going up to 40 miles an hour. But you know, as I think about it, I don't think I would ever trade driving across our great land to flying in the air where I would miss out on so much. You see, I truly am happiest when I am behind the wheel. I'm planning my next journey. I'm wondering, what adventure are you looking forward to?
I just want to thank everybody for throwing me this beautiful birthday party. I never thought I would make it to 80 years old, especially when the average life expectancy is 47. It's been a wonderful life and a rough life at times. It was 1903. My husband Charles and I were living in Grass Valley, and he decided he wanted to become a rancher. It was the year before the Newlands project was scheduled to open, and Fallon was going to have all this great water. 800 parcels of land were becoming available, and he wanted to be a rancher. He was a successful pharmacist in the local drugstore. I had a thriving medical practice. I had all my 7 children in Grass Valley, and he wanted to drag me over the Sierra Nevadas to a frontier town with very few amenities and not knowing a soul. We went round and round about that, I'll tell you. Anyway, he finally convinced me, and we became pioneers. We went east instead of west, which is the usual direction to go. But when I arrived here, I discovered I was the only doctor for miles and miles until we got to Reno. So I was quite busy. In 1905, I was made county physician, Churchill County physician, which was included treating jail inmates, any indigent persons that happened to be in Fallon at the time and had no medical resources, and deciding who to commit to the sanitarium in Carson City, who was insane or not. If somebody decided somebody was crazy. And what sticks out in my mind, I'll never forget. I won't name any names, but I think you all know him. He was running up and down the streets in Fallon. He was sure Napoleon was invading. He was telling everybody to get indoors, get your guns, we're going to be attacked. Poor guy, I can imagine if he really believed that, how awful that must have felt. But he did get some help. That's the important thing. As county physician, I made $50 a month, plus the $2.50 I made doing house calls. And at that time it was a very good living because the average wage was 22 cents an hour. So I did pretty well, which is a good thing because Charles was not much of a rancher, as it turned out. The one thing I did not like about Fallon was how dirty it was. There was trash strewn all around the streets and manure of every sort, chicken, goats, cows, horses, even human. And I proposed the number 3 proposal to have all hors d'oeuvre contained in a covered box. Because I was pushing to prevent infections, which there seemed to be a lot of, and I knew why, because it was so dirty. Germs thrive in manure. And anyway, I was not a popular person for the businesses that had to clean up everybody's manure in front of their place. I heard the word what did they call me? What was that? Battle axe, that was it. You heard that too? Anyway, I was a battle axe for a while. So, but they got over it, the town got cleaned up, and it was a much prettier place. Because we did not have, all we could do to fight infection is be clean. But I do believe that someday there are going to be medicines that will kill germs, but we're not there yet. So I did get to know quite a few of you driving around for house calls, but not all of my trips were pleasant. I remember one day coming back from Payson, it was December 12th, or December 31st, 1912. And the horse I was driving was just a young one, and he got spooked by the wind, as only it can blow here, and all the snow coming down. It was kind of spooky, all right, but he just panicked, and he took off with that buggy, bouncing me around right and left and up and down, and pretty soon he bounced me right out of the buggy. And if it was not for the bearskin coat I was wearing, I would have been hurt a lot worse, because 70-year-old bones do not bounce. I can tell you that. Anyway, this freight train, luckily for me, happened to be traveling 2 boats from Fallon. And they picked me up and took me back home. But I was in bed the horse made it home before I did. I was in bed for several days just nursing these bruises and aches and pains, and I have to say it was a humbling experience. I was the person in bed instead of the one outside telling the patient what to do. So it gave me a lot of perspective, and I think made me a better doctor. I don't know, after that, I still had trouble with that horse. I remember tying him to the kitchen post in front of the courthouse one day, and someone or something spooked him, and he took off running. He ran up on the boardwalk, was crashing into store windows, creating havoc, and some young man came along and finally stopped him for me. Thank goodness, before he did too much damage. But it was then I started thinking about getting an automobile. But at age 72, I didn't think I was too familiar with horses and buggies. My husband bought an automobile, so he would drive me sometimes. Women are getting more daring and having more rights than they were when I was growing up, than they had when I was growing up. Just last year, in 1920, women got the right to vote. Isn't that wonderful? And when I got to medical school, it was very difficult to prove that I had a brain and could somehow pass the work needed to become a physician. But the University of California opened its doors to women to their medical school in 1874. And I remember this one school teacher decided to change careers, and she graduated from the University of California as a physician in 1876. Kind of opened the doors for the rest of us who followed. And in a couple decades, 10% of the physicians graduating from the University of California were women, compared to 4% nationally. So I thought that was really impressive. Well, I didn't mean to ramble on and with my life story. Well, we're here to have a party. Why don't y'all come in the dining room and we'll have cake.
I would like to open this special meeting of the recently chartered Fallon Rotary Club. My name is Ira Heber-Kent. My friends call me IH, and I hope you do as well. As the Rotary Club's newly elected first guest of honor, I've been asked to share a little bit about myself and my family's involvement as pioneers in the early founding of Fallon. Before we start, does anyone know who won the 1925 World Series? Held last Wednesday? I heard over the telegraph that the Pittsburgh Pirates beat the Washington Senators. And Ray Kramer had pitched the final series and winning run. I wish I could have been back there to see it. Okay. I was born August 15, 1855, in Lycans Valley, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles north of Harrisburg, to my parents Erastus and Catherine Kent. My father was a school teacher, but several years following their marriage, they moved up to Binghamton, New York. Dad loved teaching, but decided the only way to be flush in this world was through what he called sutlery. So Dad started a farm supply and implement business. In a short time, he became the leading dealer in the community of supplies and farm implements. So I really ended up being raised and schooled in New York instead of Pennsylvania. While growing up, I was impressed on how my dad always saw opportunity in everything. Whether it was long-handled shovels for miners, or it was butter churns for folks. As a merchant, he became very successful in selling newly developed machines to save labor, increase crop productivity, and the necessities of one's home. Back then, this included high-demand items like calico, muslin, gingham, as well as household items such as tallow candles, safety matches, and Castile soap products. The new McCormick Reaper was a real popular for harvesting. But most important, he was my father, who I respected greatly, and he was also a mentor to me in learning the fine art of merchandising. In my early years, I once read an article in the local news sheet that featured the noted newspaper man, Horace Greeley. He wrote an 1865 editorial, "Go west, young man, and take advantage of the opportunities in the nation's expansion to California." Now, I knew deep down, this is where I need to be. When I was 19, which would be about 1874, I came west on the new Transcontinental Railroad in a train car with some spring wagons as a stake for my father to help make my fortune. Did some horse trading while traveling through California and Oregon. My fortune wasn't so good there in selling those wagons. It was the need for good horses that brought me to Nevada. I did hear about places like Rattown, La Platte, and also this green area in Churchill County, Nevada. And I knew this was an opportunity for those who created it. I finally landed in Stillwater about 1876. At 21 years of age, I found a ready market for my wagons there. Set up shop, became a rancher, and taught myself how to read telegraph messages by ear, using that new Morse telegraph code. I was even offered the job as the Churchill County recorder, and I accepted it readily. Now that I think about it, I've held just about every local government position within Churchill County. Then my life really changed. I married my Mary, the love of my life, on November 2nd, 1879. Now I had something truly important to live for. We were both 24 years old and very enamored with each other. One night we waited until Mary's father retired for the evening, and we eloped. We had to, due to, let's say, lack of political harmony. That was with my future father-in-law, Charles Kaiser, who was a sheepman and a Republican. We took a two-seated buggy in the company of Judge and Mrs. Pike to Virginia City, where Bishop Whitaker of Comstock Episcopal married us. If I had been a Republican, I think it would have been all right, I'm sure. Within a few days, my new father-in-law sent the new Mrs. Kent's belongings over to her. I have had interesting discussions with that old Republican, but I've gotten along pretty well with him through the years. To show my sincere intent to raise a family with Mary, I borrowed money and I built the finest house at that time in Churchill County. Mary loves to read just like me, loves the craft, and is of strong constitution. Plus, she was also very well versed in the fine art of merchandising after working in her father's general store, I might add. She gave me 4 beautiful children, our Longfellow, Charles, Florence, and little Keddie. But the Lord took little Keddie too early. I really miss what my little girl could have become. By the way, Mary couldn't be here today due to holding a reception at the house. But know that we have our 50th golden wedding anniversary coming up in a few years. Hopefully, I can make it to our 60th wedding anniversary. As they say, tempus fugit. In 1880, I took a chance, sat and passed the Nevada State Bar exam. They said at 25 the kid couldn't, but I showed them. This also enabled me to serve 2 terms as district attorney along the way and became county treasurer in 1902. Stillwater was still the county seat of Churchill at the time. I also became sheriff there with a couple of run-ins with some ne'er-do-wells, but managed to come out okay. I heard rumblings that Senator Warren Williams sponsored a statute to move the county seat from Stillwater to the emerging town of Fallon. I kind of figured something was up after hearing old Warren bought the Fallon Ranch in 2001. And the Reclamation Act of 1902 included the state's first federal irrigation sites, with possibly the need for dams and canals throughout this part of the country. In 2003, he had a statute passed for the move using his newly acquired 200 voting residents. I didn't want the county seat changed, but the handwriting was on the wall for me. So, I knew that Warren Williams and Jim Richards didn't want me here competing with their stores. So I negotiated with J.M. Sanford, and he sold me 3 lots for $300. I thought he robbed me for the price. In 1903, I started the Kent Company with Tom Duff, George Ernst, J.W. Freeman, and W.R. Wyrick, each purchasing 200 shares. In 1906, the Kent family followed the Churchill County records transfer to our new location on Main Street and Center in Fallon. I contracted with some Teamsters and struck up a 20-mule horse team, and we moved Kent Lumber, building lock, stock, and barrel on skids from Stillwater to Fallon. Took us 5 days on those darn wagon runs, but we finally made it. Months later, it became clear that we needed more dry goods space for our growing business in Fallon. This time, we built a larger store using some local rock quarried from Rattlesnake Hill. I added the warehouse in 1917 when Fairview Mine directors approached me on their outstanding debt. We just simply agreed that I would mark their debt satisfied if they transferred and moved one of their warehouses over to our property. We just reassembled it here in our yard. We needed a warehouse to expand more, and it helped Fairview Mine satisfy their debt. Well, I don't want to get too long on the stories. However, let it be known, I do have more for another day, especially about the Alfalfa Mill raffle, the Nevada Sugar Beets, and my Wadsworth escapade with my very good friend, W.C. Grimes. I was going to get to that. I would like to close today with a reminder of the Rotary Club's 4-way test of the things we say or do in our day-to-day lives. Number 1, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be better to all concerned? Thank you very much for your attention, patience, and courtesy in allowing me to share a little bit about myself, my family, and the great little towns that we live in. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Thank you, Mayor Ginsburg, for putting me on the agenda here at the September 1930 City Council meeting. I'm delighted to be here, actually. We're going to talk about, my agenda topic is to discuss moving this historic building next week. As you are aware, my boss, Mr. Andrew Drum Sr., is a pioneer building movement here in the Valley. And he, unfortunately, couldn't be here today. His son, Andrew Drum, Andy, we know him as Andy. He got the contract down in Las Vegas to finish that road between Jean and the California border. And he wanted his dad's opinion on a few things, so they flew down this afternoon to have a look at that. But he did leave me with a presentation for you, and he wanted me to present how good we take care of the buildings we move. Now, he borrowed this projector from Mr. Stone at the new Fallon Theatre. It used to be the Rex Theatre until just the 1st of September. They remodeled the entire interior. If you haven't been down there yet, they took out the balcony and they put the seats all the way to the back. Quite a neat change down there. And we got the slides. Yeah, I got 6 slides here. We're going to look at 6 slides of buildings we've moved, and to let you know that we take care of the buildings we move. So, without further ado, let me just tell you, it's not uncommon to move buildings. If you think of the mining towns about, when the town goes bust, they pick up the wooden buildings and move on to the next big boom town. That's just what they do. By the way, I need to introduce myself. My name is Samuel Short. You can call me Sam for short. Our first slide. Ah, yes. I.H. Kent hired us to move his store from Stillwater down to Fallon. This slide gives me a chance to talk about the way we move buildings as well. As you notice, we have a couple beams, skids on each building. This is a smaller building. And we basically hooked up the 20 mules and horses and hauled that over every bump and breadth we have between the 20 miles between Fallon and Stillwater. Did a lot that was on North Main Street. Now, typically that's basically all we did. Sometimes we use a capstan. We took advantage of the leverage of the capstan to move the larger buildings that I'm going to talk to you about today. And so, Kent's, Stillwater, great family, brought the store into Fallon. They began the store in Stillwater in 1892, and then brought it on into Fallon. And that's about all I wanted to say about this one. Oh, yes, okay, now this takes you back a ways. Now, there was a fellow by the name of Frank Austin, had a large piece of property. J.W. Bond came through here in 67, 66, came back in 67, married Lynn Allen's wife, no, Lynn Allen's, no, not his wife, married Lynn Allen's younger sister. Yeah, Lynn Allen's younger sister. And then they went back to California. 10 years later, they came back and bought the Frank Austin place, okay? And when he was here in 1878, is when he built this lovely home here. Now, this isn't the location there, but it's a home, okay? This is after we moved it to this new location. So Bond had it, and then Mike and Eliza family, their 3 sons came, and they lived in this home for about 10 years until 1901 when Warren Williams bought it. But when Fallon was there, he established a post office there. And that's the key thing that we want to talk about there. But Fallon lived there, and then Warren Williams bought the property from Mike Fallon. And this was Williams' home as well. When Williams died in 1913, Addie thought the house was just a bit too much for her. And so we were the ones commissioned to move it. We moved it directly west and then north a ways. And in order to do that, we had to cut it in half. And we cut it in half and moved a piece at a time up that way. And a lovely stone brick building was put in place where Ada lives there now with Cora and E.H. Hirsch and their daughter Nadine live in that place. That's where that used to be, and now it's north on a place where Ed Morai and Ed Veneraci and Sam Morai. Sam Morai and Ed Veneraci are operating that place now, the big Williams branch. So that was quite a project. That took some capstans to move that. That was heavy. All right. Okay, now this, we did not move the sugar beet factory. It's what's not in the picture that we moved, okay? There was a boarding house here, a boarding house with 22 rooms, and when the sugar beet factory was finished in 1911, now you have to realize the dam wasn't actually finished until 1914, so they were very eager to get the sugar beets in the ground. And they hired Orientals and Mexicans to come in and thin the crops and to work the factory. And so we had the boarding house there, and we moved it. A fellow on the end of, if you take Cemetery Road north, that big plot of land off to the left, the only home is there now is Louis Moyles, and we moved it for Louis Moyles. That was 1919, and the newspapers at the time. Now let me quote this way because it's quite good, and this will be a recommendation to you that we know what we're doing. It was the October 1919 newspaper. It said, A.D. Drum and his crew moved the boarding house without so much as cracking the plaster on the walls. And we thought that was pretty good. That's a recommendation that we do a good job with what we do. And so, you know, the sugar beet factory, here it is 1930. It went bankrupt shortly after it started. Curly top just stunted the growth of the sugar beets. And then in addition to that, the farmers realized that they were getting more profit on the other crops they were growing without the sugar beets being involved. So that's still out. It's still there on the side of the hill, right? It's right next to the cemetery. The cemetery is put there in the old fort, and the sugar beet factory. You know what I'm saying? Okay, guys. Now this slide, he put that in there so you can see through the buildings that are not there, because this is right after the 1910 fire, and this is looking to the east through the burnout western side of Main Street that burned down. We moved a couple of those buildings. Now the reason we moved the buildings on the east side, there was a fellow by the name of John W. Flood. Now John W. Flood, he had this vision of creating a beautiful theatrical building in which people could come and watch his movies and his vaudeville acts. He was a vaudeville performer. He was known as Jumping Jack, quite a talented fellow. His wife Maybelle became a singer. And they wanted a space there. So he had established a Rex Theater. He named all his theaters the Rex. And he had established a Rex Theater in what they called, well, today you know it as the Morrison Mooring drugstore. They had knocked a hole in the wall, and they were performing to an audience there, right behind the New River Hotel. And beyond that, the Benoit shop and the laundry shop down was there. The wooden buildings that we moved out of. The two that I wanted to talk to you about in particular was pointed when they see there. That's the New River Hotel. We used a capstan on that as well, very heavy. But we basically cranked it up, put the sleds under, got the capstan in place, and slowly moved it directly east, and then we moved it directly south to the new, well, not the new, but to the center street, to the Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway was going through there. And so as we parked the New River Hotel on the plot there on the Lincoln Highway, just down the street from the Overland Hotel and the Fallon Theatre. And so that was the New River Hotel. Now, the proprietor of that was Willie Sanford, the son of Jim Sanford and Nancy Sanford. Now, Jim was an early politician out there in Stillwater as well. He was the county commissioner early on. And he died in 1905. His son William had purchased the New River from Jeffries and A.J. Jeffries, and he operated that hotel here in town. The Sanfords were hotel operators out in Stillwater, so that was a continuation of the family legacy there. The other building that we moved in particular I wanted to point out to you was the Benoit Harness Shop. You see it right down there, the J.W. Benoit Harness Shop. It has quite the history. It was built by J.W. Bond. I talked to you about the Bond family that built a big house there, the Williams Fallon Bond House. And he built it as the first schoolhouse in the New River District. And when they outgrew it, then Mr. Jeffries purchased it as a saloon. And they moved the saloon right next to where it's at there. And they used it as a saloon until Benoit needed it. Well, they built a brick saloon and then it was empty, so Benoit used it as a harness shop. And so to move that, we just picked that up and moved it north on Main Street, just across Williams Avenue, just down by the new city courthouse, not the city courthouse, but the county courthouse. And so that's what we did with that building. And so quite the history there, being a schoolhouse, being a saloon, and now being a harness shop. We moved that along. So that was taken 10 years, well, let's see, that was taken 10 years before we moved. 1910. And so we moved in 1919. And so, okay, the Woodliff store. As I mentioned earlier, I hope I gave credit to Mr. Woodliff. He's the photographer. He created our slides for us today. And we borrowed that from Mr. Stone from Fallon Theatre, the new Fallon Theatre. That's going to get used to. I used to say Rex Theatre all the time. It's Fallon Theatre. Well, the name is. The Willis story. Okay, Frank Willis, photographer. His dad Thomas was a pharmacist. Came down from Virginia City, and built this small little house here, store. It has a lovely storefront window there in front. You see that? That's the first one in Fallon to have something like that. Built that in 1904. It's been around. It's a good, solid building. I hope that sometime in the future, if there's some person that has enough gumption to create a museum, perhaps, around here, maybe they'll restore that, put that in front. That'd be a nice addition to the museum. We thank the Willis family. Okay, last one. Let's see. That brings us to our city hall that we're sitting in right now. This city hall was the second schoolhouse in the new River District. And when they outgrew that, the Standard needed a printing press area, and so they used it as a printing press, printing shop. And then time came when Fallon needed a city hall, and the Standard had moved elsewhere, and this building was vacant. And so we decided to move to this old former printing shop, former schoolhouse, current city hall. It's been city hall now for 27 years. And we're going to move it next week. We're going to move it just 50 feet south. We give you room to build the new city hall just north here and off of Williams, just down the ways from the new Fallon Theatre. And we're excited that you've been kind enough, City Council, we appreciate it, that we give this building new life. I understand you donated the VFW, and we're going to use it. They're going to use it as a VFW hall. So that's very kind. That's good. And so we appreciate the opportunity to have lovely buildings at our community. And I hope you realize the love we have for them as movers. It's just not a job to us, but we really truly love the buildings we move. So after the new DeLongchamp's design at City Hall, and I'm glad you chose DeLongchamp. He designed it. Well, he designed the Rex, and he designed the Fraternal Hall, and he designed for Zini's Furniture and Oaks Park and several wonderful buildings. And so I'm glad you chose his design for the new City Hall. And so I know you have other agenda items, and so when you're done with the City Hall and you move everything out of this building, we'll come back and move it to the new place on Stillwater, Maine, that the VFW women have purchased for this purpose. And so thank you for your time here at City Council meeting, and appreciate it.
I love you truly, truly, dear. Life with its sorrows, life with its fears, fades into darkness when I feel you are near. 'Cause I love you truly, truly, dear. Hey kid, I don't think I've met you. I'm Ada Williams Keddie. You must be the boy that Chick sent over to work on the planes, the new mechanic, am I right? Well, you may not know me, but I can pretty much bet that that plane you're working on has met me. I'm one of the first known female aviatrixes ever in this region. And I'm pretty proud of the pioneering I was able to do. I was raised here. Are you from here? I don't think I've seen your face before. You came here from Alco? Yeah? Well, my sisters and I were raised up in Austin, where my dad, Warren Williams, and my mom, Addie Madison Williams, were doing a little bit of ranching, a little bit of mining up there. I am the third of 4 daughters. But I gotta say, I really don't remember my oldest sister. She died when I was 2 and she was only 7. She was out there with my dad
And I don't know how it happened, but an ore cart crushed her. And so they threw her up into a buckboard and rushed her back to home. But she didn't make it. She died in my mom's lap about a mile before she got to the house. One of the reasons why I think my mom was so protective of us girls is because she was afraid of losing one more. But I have to say I was kind of hard on her. I was a bit of an adventurous daughter. Took after my dad. My older sister, Abby, she and I were really, really close. And I really looked up to her as she was growing up. But when she was 19, and I would have been about 16 or 17, she got married. And we were really proud of her. Her whole future was in front of her. But by 21, she passed away giving birth to her daughter. We named her daughter Abby after her. And Mom and I and Cora, my little sister, we all helped, took a hand in raising her. Cora and I are still pretty close to this day. So one of the things that I think really kind of got me started on some of this is that my dad was not really someone who took things at face value. He was kind of an adventurer himself. They called him someone with a buoyant spirit, a strong man, a man who didn't let anything stand in his way. And so when he was 18 years old, he and his brother Abram decided to make their fortunes in the West. And so they boarded a ship in Maine, which is where they were from, and they went around the Horn on their way towards California. He, in order to help pay for his travel, he signed on as a cabin boy. And so to do all of his labor, he would work all day on a breakfast of his choice, one fried egg or 2 boiled eggs. The reason why only 1 fried egg is the cost of the grease in the pan. He always chose the 2 boiled eggs, this 6-foot-plus tall man, to try to do his work. He still eats boiled, or he ate boiled eggs most of the time that I can remember him, and growing up, I never really liked them myself. He and his brother settled in Sonora region of California, and they did the mines there. And so one of the things that they would do is they would work the mines together until they could pool their money into getting enough of a stake that they could have a 24-mule pack train. And so his brother Abram would stay there in Virginia City, and my dad would run the mules back and forth between Placer County and Virginia City, running goods back and forth over the mountains there. Abram had enough to set up a store, but not enough to buy walls, and so he had it there in a tent, and he'd run the face of the business, and my dad would run those mules, and he was well known for being able to get through no matter what the weather. And he could go a little later in the season than everybody else, and he had the guts to go a little earlier in the season than everybody else, and they made a lot of good money doing that. After a while, there was enough money to get that store started, and Abram ran that, and my dad went into the mining and ranching that got us going over in Austin. After a bit, my dad's ambitions got him into other things. He became a senator. In 1901, he bought some property out here in Fallon, and we moved there and worked with him there. Things got a little bit more and more busy, and he started to need a little bit more help, and that's how I met my Art. About 1906, Art comes onto the ranch and starts working as a foreman there. William Art Keddie. He and my dad got along pretty well because Art didn't back down from a conversation either, and neither one of them were shrinking violets when it came to the arguments that they might have or the discussions that they'd have late into the night. And for me, you couldn't keep me back. I wanted to be in that room too. And we'd sit in those chairs around the fire, and we'd talk well into the night. It wasn't long before Art and I were married. 1907. I was 21 years old, and I became Mrs. Keddie. Art was a little bit of an adventurer too. He came up from California into Reno area, and he came for the university. He wanted to learn, but as much as he wanted to learn, he really wanted to compete. He was a sportsman. He excelled at everything. He loved football, he was well known on the gridiron, he loved track, he loved speed, but what he loved the most was he was a cyclist. He would race bicycles, and he would win everything that they would put in front of him. He'd take the long runs out into the desert, he would take the short runs. They called him the greatest of them all, and the big size. And boy, did his ego enjoy that. He was not sorry one bit. And he kind of kept that as he came to the ranch, and we got married. And he turned his attention towards aviation, because we had holdings across the state, and he would use the planes to check on his farms in the north and in the south. So you say you come from Elko, we would fly up there to Elko to check the farm, and then fly back to Fallon. And he would say, it's a practical thing, it's a practical thing. It shaves off the time. I mean, we can get back and forth with this, and we can see how things are going, and we make better time that way. But he did admit that while he knew that aviation was risky, and he knew that being a pilot was dangerous, that this was his one release that was left to him as a family man. He was who taught me, and you really couldn't have kept me from it. I wanted to be in there with him. I wanted to spend the time. And it was not easy as a woman to get a chance to fly a plane. But let's be honest, it was not easy for my husband to say no to me for very long. It didn't hurt me one bit that I had some of my father's size. Flying a plane was not an easy feat in that time. You can see by the picture that I have here on the wall, I mean, that's me. Look at me. Right? We were open to the air. It's just rivets and leather up there. It's cold. After a while there, I mean, once I kind of got to where my muscles could take it and I knew what I was doing, I was flying back and forth from Fallon to Reno weekly. And I would take the plane over the Sierras to get a little bit of a look at San Francisco very, very frequently. Like I said, multiple times a month when I was at the height of it. And the Sierras were very difficult because open to the air like this, you couldn't fly too high or you'd lose your oxygen. So we were flying low over those mountains, riding the wind currents, and anything could kick that plane and knock us off course or knock us right out of the air. It was a muscle game, because if you pushed on that stick, the stick would push back at you. If you pulled on the stick, it would pull back at you. If something started to kick you, you had to use all of your muscle, brace your legs to move that plane. It's a two-person job every time, and we had to carry our own fuel. And you know, if you're going to San Francisco to catch a show, you had to pack everything that you were going to wear. So I'd fly down in there, pull up in a spot, clean myself up, put on my evening duds, and go out to the show. I loved being able to spend time in San Francisco. It was where Art and I were married, and I had a lot of friends there, and it was nice to get out and see the city lights from time to time. And when Art became a senator, it became really nice as a release to get out there and meet some friends and see some people. I really loved that time. And so when the newspaper approached me and asked me if they could take my picture, I was so proud. I was so proud. This picture comes from the Churchill County Eagle, June 21, 1921. And the whole world was in my hands. The whole world was at my feet. Look at that smile. That girl had no idea that it would just be in month, July 1921, when it all came crashing down. Literally. Art and our friend Jack Frost, John Frost, the pilot, the aviator from the war, who was so good, he had 11 crashes and survived every one of them. He came back and he flew with my husband, and they were testing a new plane Art had bought, Miss Nevada, an experimental plane, faster, smaller, more fuel efficient. Checked it out 3 times and declared it sound. He went over that thing over and over and over again to make sure that it was safe. but on their way back from Elko, we think that the wing detached, and they went down in the desert outside of Silver Spring. The fire was seen for miles, the smoke was seen in Fallon. And they said that they could see Jack waving from the cockpit, but they couldn't get him out. Art never really, they think that he died upon impact. It was very, very quick for him. For me, you know, I had no idea when I made him breakfast that morning that the news that would come that evening would be that I was no longer married to a living husband. I didn't fly for a long time. I couldn't get back into a plane. Something that had been so safe and so freeing for me suddenly became something that I didn't know how to face. I spent time with my community. I spent time with my mother. She'd come and lived with us for a while. Cora lived with me, helped raise my nieces and my nephews. But it took me a long time to turn back toward a plane. It took me a long time to start thinking about what else I was going to do. But, you know, by the time I got to 1931, about 10 years, I decided that it was time to look again at living a little bit, and you know, stars aligned, and I met a man, a Mr. Lazelle from Carson. He was a radiologist, an x-ray tech, and a lot of other things as well. He came into town with a whole lot of ideas, and a sweet talker and a big talker, and spreading money around, and he caught my eye and I caught his. And they called it a whirlwind relationship. It was under a month that we were getting married in the foyer of the house that my father had built for my husband and I when we got married. That beautiful house on Main. We probably didn't know each other very well, Lazelle and I. I think that for me, I was looking for somebody that could give me a little bit of adventure. For him, I think he was looking for somebody who could give him a bit of a bankroll. In fact, he was heard the night of our wedding going from bar to bar buying rounds for everybody saying, "Drinks are on me, boys, I've married a millionairess." Well, we were both mistaken by a lot. While I did inherit from my father when he passed, myself and Cora and my stepbrother John, we did inherit, but the Great Depression was difficult for people who were in farming, and my dad was no exception. Although we had at one point the largest sheep operation in the state of Nevada, with farms from Elko to Perone, we were not holding that well by the time Lazelle and I had gotten married. I mean, the markets fell, we sold off to keep going, and we were doing all right, but we weren't by any stretch of the imagination moneyed enough to keep up with his ambitions. He had schemes and investments in a lot of different places, and none of them really worked out for him. And about 6 months after we were married, he borrowed some money, paid $20 to get his car, or to rent a car, because to get his car out of the mechanic cost him more. And he drove across to California and knocked over a bank in Bridgeport. And for about $600, $675 and some cents, he ended up on a high-speed car chase into California. And they first thought that he'd gone down to San Francisco, but the sheriff here in Churchill County found that he had bought gas in Hawthorne. And then from there, he found his way down to Hollywood. By the time they found him, there was the money on the passenger seat, and he had taken his pistol and shot himself in the parking lot. I was a widow again. Feel like I might have dodged a bit of a bullet there. We didn't stay married long enough for much of what I had to have gone with him. Even though it didn't work out, that romance, I think for me, I started to turn to flying again. And I got up a little bit here and there. I got out a little bit more here and there. And I thought that it was maybe time for me to try again. I've been struggling lately. I've struggled since my birthday with what the doctors have been calling a lack of vigor, a lack of energy. I haven't really felt as much ready to get out of the house. And for a while there, they thought it was anemia, or they thought that I just needed to eat a lot more liver, which I was doing a lot of. But finally, the doctors did some tests, and they said that I was suffering from leukemia. My white blood cell count is too small, and my white blood cells themselves are too small, and I think, well, you know, sometimes I'm going to feel a little up, and sometimes I'm going to feel a little down. I do know that my doctor is my good friend in San Francisco. So I do get to have a chance for him to come and visit me on some of those newfangled passenger planes, and I get to get out there from time to time as well, even though I don't usually run point anymore. But it was a beautiful October day today, here in 1933, and I looked out over those mountains and I thought, the sun is shining, the sky is bright, the wind is perfect, and I feel really good. I think it's time to get back up into a plane. So I thought that today I'd just come back out to the airport and put a little bit of air between me and get up closer to the sun. So I thought that's what I'd do. And I'm figuring that I've talked a little bit plenty. You know, I can see that the wind has changed a little bit, and I thought I'd chase the light because I'm not entirely sure how long that light's going to last. So it was great talking to you, kid. Good to meet you. If I don't get to bring you out today, maybe I can catch you on the other side and take you on a flight tomorrow. Looks like I forgot my gloves in the hangar. I'll see you the next time I come around.
Oh my goodness, look at this crowd. My sister Bess did tell me she was throwing a birthday celebration for me, but I didn't expect all of you to attend. Thank you. I am overwhelmed and I am honored. My name is Mary Daisy Allen. Most of you know me as Daisy, and that's okay. That's what I've been called since I was a little girl. So, if you want to talk to me, please call me Daisy. Now, it is amazing to realize that I have spent 8+ decades on this earth. And it is also very surprising to me that it is now 1953. You know, those golden years are not necessarily so golden. They certainly have come with a lot of challenges. But then all your years have challenges one way or another. So many changes have occurred since I was a little girl living with my parents and my siblings in a little house just south of Fallon Theatre, out on the Allen Ranch. Everything, and I do mean everything, has changed, or seems to have. They say life is what's lived between the dashes, the year of your birth and the year of your death. Well, thank goodness I haven't gotten to that last date, but I have had some adventures since the beginning date. I was born in 1873. I was just a typical Fallon girl growing up. My parents, Lemuel and Sarah Allen, being some of the first pioneer families, were quite dedicated to formal education. In fact, my father established the first school in the area, the Big Adobe, and he was even the first teacher. This is where I began my early education, as did most of the children of that time. All those children are grown now, or regrettably have passed away. But we were dedicated students because our parents were dedicated parents. For those of you who do not know me well, I am one of 9 children. The 3 of us that remain now are my sister Elizabeth, otherwise known as Bess, and our brother Lemuel Jr. We were typical ranch kids who learned to ride the horses, mostly before we could learn that we had learned to walk. Most of you who knew Lemuel know his passion for his horses, racers, jumpers, fine horse flesh, and all. But I bet you don't know about my own dabbling in racing. That's one of my sister's favorite stories when she gets to call me a wild spirit. You see, my father recognized my riding skills early and let me ride his horses. As I grew older, he allowed me to actually compete in the races because I was so good at getting the best out of his horses. I knew them, and they knew me. I tied up my hair, hid it under a cap, bound my bodice until flat, and wore men's breeches. All this at a time that surely would not be recognized or approved of a woman riding astride and racing horses. It was all great fun until the day my cap blew off and my hair came tumbling down. Father was not happy as he tried to explain away our daring to the racing powers that were there. Bess, however, loves that story. Don't you do, sister? As a side note, I have to tell you that I did make headlines in the Nevada State Journal when I raced in the Ormsby District Fair. I was in my 20s and still pushing the edge of propriety. My opponent was also a female, and apparently society felt that we could be tolerated. My challenger was Miss Bagwell. She beat me by about a half a length, but I had won a similar race at the Nevada State Fair, so it was noted in the paper that we were tied. We had both won one race. Another great adventure I had in my 20s, I managed to get a paid position, mind you, paid, as a federal census enumerator. I spent days in the dusty Nevada desert, traveling in the new automobile contraptions, becoming such a rage at the time. Just making the journey between farms was a challenge. Gathering the information demanded by the U.S. government, I went from household to household. Sometimes welcomed, sometimes not. Father was a political man, and I came from a political family. And in 1903, when I was 30 years old, he became the Lieutenant Governor of Nevada. We were often in society with movers and shakers like Governor John Sparks. I believe this is when I first became interested in politics and government. However, my father was a staunch anti-suffrage man, so strongly opposed women being involved in such dirty work as politics. Time moved on. One might say it was rather underhanded to allow a girl to ride racehorses while forbidding involvement in politics. But of course, I would never have told him that. I've been married twice, once divorced and once widowed. My first husband, Edward Williams, was an entrepreneur with dreams of grandeur. Along with Bess and her husband, we were some of the earliest residents of Fairview. It was 1906, and the town needed the services of business-minded people like us. Edward and his partner, A.E. Hammond, ran 2 touring cars, a Polk Toledo and a Thomas Flyer. Between them, they ferried travelers daily between Fairview, Fallon, and Hazen, and back again. Meanwhile, Bess and I opened and ran the home restaurant, feeding miners and businessmen alike. It was merely a tent at first, but then we established a Fairview hotel that included the restaurant. It was a massive effort for myself and Bess. We ended up cooking about 30 dozen eggs for breakfast most days and served between 100 to 200 meals daily. We were the quickest fast food restaurant in town, I guess. Hotel, eatery, and transportation, we made money from those who grubbed for treasure in the surrounding hills. Everything didn't last long, though, maybe 12 years or so. We, Bess, Edward, and I, lasted an even shorter time before Edward decided to move to Reno. From there, we eventually moved into Butte, Montana. And it was while we were living there that Edward and I divorced, and I came back home to Fallon. I was living with my friend Callie Ferguson in the 20s when friends encouraged me to run for the Nevada State Assembly. Father had died only 2 years previously, and I was sure he would not approve. Not even a smidgen of a bit. However, with the support of many friends, I pushed into the race. Backed by strong women like Callie, who was a suffragist herself, I actually won. And I'm almost positive that Father rolled over in his grave. For 2 years, I served this state as a Democratic woman representative. I co-authored and pushed through 2 bills and served on several committees. It was during this time that I met my soon-to-be husband number 2, James Abernathy White. James was a mining engineer, and we established our home in Reno. However, as a mining man, his work took him to the job site in Ione, where he spent most of his week, coming home on the weekends. Unfortunately, just after 9 short months, James was killed in an automobile accident while returning from Ione to Fallon for our family Thanksgiving celebration. We had so little time together. I never had children. With either man, I married. And this was an incredibly sad time for me, alone once more. For a time, I stayed in our little Reno house that, as always, I was drawn back home to Fallon. I moved in with Callie once again for a brief time, and then moved in with Bess and her husband, Jack Conniff. Together, she and I ran the Fallon Hotel on Carson Street. I saw in today's paper that I had been declared the oldest living resident in Churchill County. Not at all sure how I feel about that honor, but I can say it's been a wild ride for what my sister has done, a wild spirit. Thank you all for being with me today.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2030 Club, or thank you for welcoming me to the 2030 Club. As you know, I'm Willie Capucci. I started the 2030 Club here in town. I was also the first curator at the Churchill County Museum. I ran a couple of bars. I've done a couple of things around town. People know me. The thing is the other day, the newspaper ran an article about how I had 2,500 ducks and geese. I'm not sure if it's quite that many, but I've got quite a few. The story there is, about 20 years ago, I had a little mallard hen, and I decided that she must be lonely, so I bought her a drake. Bought her a little male, and so that she would have a friend, that she'd have a mate. A couple of years later, I started noticing, I don't know if you know, but my house is on the corner of Schurz and Scheckler, right where the TCID canal comes through there. Somebody started dropping off their own ducks and geese. So there were greenheads, there were mallards, there were some that looked suspiciously like those little baby ducklings that were really cute at Easter time. They kind of lose their cute within a couple of months. Yeah, I had some of them as well. And then at the end of irrigation season, the the canals started drying up. So I got worried for my ducks and my geese, and I dug a small pond. It was, 30 feet by 50. It wasn't huge, but I wanted to protect my ducks and my geese. And now I got 2,500. So. I've got other animals as well. I've got some bobwhites outside in hutches. I've got a couple of chuckers. I've got a blind pheasant in my living room because I don't want him to get eaten by coyotes. I've got a half a dozen peacocks around town. You probably hear them in the morning. And yeah, so they're kind of fun. I've got an old black dog named Barney. That I came out one morning, and this old dog was just tied to my front fence. So he's my dog now. So yeah. At one point, I was the only member of the Fallon Humane Society, and I kind of took pride in that at the time. Sarah Dowling. Sarah, are you in here? I can't see you. Sarah? Right here. She's here. Okay. Do me a favor. Is your mom going to be coming by again this year? Probably. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, little Sarah Dowling back here and her little baby sister Star, their mom Stena is one of the school bus drivers. And at the end of every year, assuming that she can get permission slips from every single kid on that bus, they stop at my house and they come and they feed the ducks and the geese. I don't know where they get the food, the old bakeries and whatnot, but that seems to be a real hit with the kids. And tell your mom I love to see her every year, and hope to see her keep coming. I was born right here in Fallon, 1913, so I'm 72 years old now. My parents both came from Italy. Both of them had kind of a tough time with the language, especially reading. My father, Ernesto, came over from Genoa. I know around here we like to pronounce it Genoa, but back in the old country it's Genoa. And so Ernesto comes over in 1885. A businessman in Virginia City pays his way to get him across the ocean, but he gets as far as New York and he can't get any further. He's kind of run out of money. So he spends the next couple of years polishing shoes, and he finally gets over here. When he gets himself settled, he calls back home for my mother Louisa, and she's from Naples, and they come over, and then they start raising a family. I've got three sisters, Rosie, Lena, and Linda. Linda sadly passed away at a young age. She was only 13 when she died. My brother Armando, how do I say this? He was kind of a rapscallion. He dropped out of school in 7th grade, and I'm not sure, but the feeling was kind of mutual that he didn't care for school, and maybe not so much the other way as well. He came to school one day. He was sent home. When he came to school, he had tussled with a skunk, and he didn't bother getting himself cleaned up. So yeah, they sent him home a little bit early. He had, how do I phrase this? He didn't care for riding the bus, and he took some railroad spikes and he planted them in the dirt on the road with the idea that the bus is going to run over these spikes and flatten the tires so he wouldn't have to go to school. So, yeah, he was not the most ardent student. He was a very hard worker though. He and I would go around town and deliver milk, and then pick milk up, and then we take it to the dairy. At one time, there was a grocery store that had burned to the ground, burned down, and we noticed there were a whole bunch of burnt oranges laying on the ground. And we were so excited we were able to rescue those oranges because we only ever got oranges at Christmas. And so here it is, middle of summer, we get oranges, so that was pretty wonderful. I mentioned my sister Rosie. My father bought a 1925 Chevy touring car, and he had never had an automobile before. He'd run farm equipment, he'd done that kind of stuff, but he wasn't used to the car, and he was really nervous. He bought 5 gallons of grease from IH Cans, about 3 grease guns, and he made sure that we greased every single zerk and every point and every gun. And then before we were able to bring the car home, myself and my brother and my sisters, we got those, remember those horseshoe-shaped magnets? And we had them on strings, and we walked around the driveway of the yard. We made sure that we picked up all the nails and the screws because he didn't want to get a flat tire. I think we picked up about 20, but my father was happy with that. So we all pile in the car. We decide we're going to take a road trip to Tahoe. Go see Tahoe. You see the color start to change. It's just beautiful, right? You guys know it. And Rosie's the only one who can drive. So she gets us up there, it's no problem. We have a lovely little picnic lunch, and we're coming back home, and as we're going down some of those hills, the car just starts picking up speed, faster and faster. I'll bet we were going 30, 35, maybe 40 miles an hour. Breathtaking speed. Rosie finally gets the car stopped, the old Chevy stopped, and we're sitting there, we're checking things out. And another motorist comes by, and we flag him down. We're having problems with our automobile. Can you help us? Can you figure out what it was? Rosie hadn't been driving all that long. And she had been told, when you're coming down the hill, put the car in second gear, and then the transmission will, automatically slow you down. You won't be going that fast. And she did that. But she forgot to take her foot off the clutch. So we were just coasting down those hills. I'll tell you what, I've got some more stories that I could tell, but I appreciate you coming in, you listening to me. I'd love to talk to you afterwards a little bit. But in the meantime, keep in mind the motto of the 2030 Club, the quote from the great Abraham